You're listening to Retail Remix, your inside access to candid conversations with the people shaping retail's future. Here's your host, Alicia Esposito.
I know a lot of our listeners are either early or in the middle of their generative AI journeys. They're still trying to figure out what exactly it means for their business, how they can benefit, and really what success looks like. That's why I always think it's beneficial to have folks on the show who have done a lot of the work and do have proven use cases and outcomes to share with us. That's why I'm especially excited to have Jim Lyski on the show today. He is EVP and Chief Growth and Strategy Officer for CarMax. Now, we don't cover the auto market very much, but CarMax is truly revolutionizing the way consumers research, price compare, and of course, buy used cars. A process that always left a little bit to be desired. So today, Jim is not just sharing a little bit about himself and the work that he's doing day in and day out to further the CarMax business, but how he and the team have embraced generative AI and AI in general to elevate and differentiate the CarMax experience. Because although consumer needs and expectations have certainly evolved since the company's founding 30 years ago, the standards of the CarMax promise, which is to create an easier and more transparent used car buying experience, are very much the same. Listen in because we dig into several areas of the CarMax customer experience and how AI is bringing it to the next level. Jim, thanks so much for joining us on Retail Remix. So great to have you on.
I appreciate that. I'm excited to participate in a little conversation with you.
Yeah, and little, I think, is maybe not quite where we're going to go. I think we're going to go pretty big here today, but I think, one, your role in and of itself is a bit of a big deal, Chief Growth and Strategy Officer, but you're also doing some incredible work at your company, CarMax. So to kick things off, I would love for you to, I guess, just give us a lay of the land about your role, your responsibilities, and I guess most importantly, your goals.
All right, that sounds good. I think you could summarize it in that my primary responsibility is for growth at the company, and that is both kind of short-term growth, leveraging our capabilities into the market and positioning the company correctly through our marketing team, which I have accountability for. Also, our longer-term growth, and that is coming up with a corporate strategy, identifying the best way to win, not only today, but in the future, and making sure that we're building out the capabilities that will continue to keep CarMax growing beyond its current 30 years and into the next 30 years. So those are the main things I'm focused on. And then I have a lot of accountabilities to help me get from here to there. Aforementioned marketing department rolls up to me, our business development department, our strategy organization, as well as our Edmunds brand, which is an acquisition we made a couple of years ago that kind of opened up the aperture of different ways to think about market growth. So
that's great. And the company's been around for about 30 years, you said, and you've been with CarMax for about a decade, maybe a little bit more. Is that right?
Just a little bit more. I had my 10-year anniversary back in August.
Wow. Congratulations, first of all. And second of all, I'd love your perspective, again, since you've, I guess, been with the company about a third of its existence. How has the company's vision evolved and its intentions as a business, especially considering the vast change in consumer behaviors and expectations during that time?
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty interesting in that CarMax, I'll give you the origin story really quickly, and that'll help inform kind of how we're seeing the future.
Great.
So back when we started, we were actually a offshoot of Circuit City. So hopefully most of the listeners know Circuit City, but they were a major competitor to Best Buy. And Circuit City at the time, kind of at their apex growth, was wise enough to look around and say, hey, are there different places we could explore that could leverage some of our core capabilities? And they saw their core capability as a superior retail experience. And so they looked at a number of different industries found an industry where the consumer experience was absolutely abhorrent in used cars, and thought, well, if we can bring some of our expertise into that industry, maybe we can make a big enough of a difference to be successful there. And that's exactly what they did when they started up CarMax 30 years ago.
No, I love that. So I'm so glad you brought up that point that the used car experience left a lot to be desired. Over time, I mean, is that understanding that idea that CarMax's goal is to improve that experience, make it easier? Like, is that value proposition and associate key differentiators, are those very much intact, or like how has that changed over time, I guess is the big question.
Yeah, okay. So just like it was 30 years ago, what we tried to do is leverage insights from the consumer and be kind of a consumer-led business. So obviously, nobody is really happy with the used car experience back then. We used those consumer insights to identify the things that they really wanted. And what they really wanted was just some trust and some transparency. I mean, it was a model, and it has been a model for decades of the dealer has all the information, you, the consumer, have none, and good luck making an equitable deal. That's basically been the model. And what CarMax tried to do was bring in full transparency. These are what the cars cost. There's going to be no haggling. This is the price is the price. We're going to show you what kind of interest rates you can derive from the bank. We're not going to mark those up like many have and frankly still do. And we're going to make sure that you feel like you got a fair deal. And that kind of key value proposition to still have the best car buying experience in the industry, that has not changed. And I don't see that changing. The differentiators, the things that bring that to life, certainly have evolved with the use of technology and data and best practices and things like that. So don't change the value prop, change the differentiators that execute against that value prop, and be demonstrably better in the marketplace is kind of the strategy in a nutshell.
Yeah, no, it's great. And CarMax has been one of the early movers, leaders even in generative AI, especially as it relates to customer experience. So I think that really ties nicely to what you were saying, like the value prop hasn't changed. It's more so how that is delivered or elevated or brought to the customer. I do want to dig into some specific areas where you're seeing success and you have been making some moves, but I do want to start from, I guess, the beginning of it all. When did you first come across or learn of generative AI, either personally or as a company? And what was the nexus for it all? What was the reason to move in this case? Like, what motivated you to explore the new opportunities that could exist for CarMax?
So there's a couple of questions in there. So just kind of from the CarMax lens, we haven't been in the industry for, quite some time and selling more cars than anybody else and buying more cars than anybody else and transporting those cars and financing those cars. We had a trove of data, and at its surface, that data had the potential to be a competitive advantage. But the fact was, like a lot of companies, our data was what I call a data swamp. It was all there, but by the time you waded into the swamp and found exactly what you wanted and applied it to your opportunity or problem, that took quite a lot of hours, quite a lot of effort, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, until you could actually leverage it to your advantage. And so we had a strong initiative, probably almost 10 years ago, right after I got here, of taking the swamp, turning it into a nice, clean, pristine data lake, and then most recently taking that data lake and putting it to the cloud so that it is accessible in real time for multiple users to apply to multiple problems simultaneously. And so that's kind of that structural change that we did that laid the groundwork to actually be able to leverage generative AI or frankly, any kind of AI. Super glad we did it. It allowed us really to start experimenting on the AI front. So that's kind of the first half of your question. For me personally, I've always been a CMO that was grounded in the use of data to competitive advantage. And I think I learned a lot of that when I worked at FedEx years ago. And all the information we had about packages and all the information we had about consumers and being able to leverage that into something as a market offering that nobody else could. And then that's kind of the same application that we wanted to do here. And so I've always stayed up to speed and done a lot of reading and attended a lot of conferences and other things that are all around the use of data. And I think I don't know the exact date when I first heard about generative AI, but it just made a ton of sense. So that's kind of where we started.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I'm glad you brought up not just generative AI, but AI in general, right? Because I've been covering the industry personally for about 13 years now. And I feel like AI has always been mostly part of the retail tech conversation, especially as we discuss things like inventory management or merchandise planning. But it seems like now it's getting further into all these different functions and ways of doing things, especially because of all of that data, like you mentioned. And I'm sure that point around into data swamp is something a lot of listeners are kind of nodding their head to. But I guess the follow-up question for you there is, you're realizing and recognizing the opportunity. So how did you go about prioritizing where and how to start? Like, was there a foundation that had to go into place first? Or like, how did you, I guess, kind of set the plan before you went into motion?
So kind of my MO is that when you're introducing a company to kind of new things and things that could have a big opportunity, you can't like take multiple years to tangibly show others what it could be. So for example, I have peers here on the senior team that they're experts in their area, but they're familiar with mine. And my ability then to say, all right, let me demonstrate, like, let me make it, like I said, tangible to you on the power that could be inherent in this approach. And so I always look for those things that are first in my control, so I don't have to like spend all my time convincing everybody else. I look for things that are minimal investment initially, like I call it a skunk work, call it a MVP, like a minimally viable product, but something I can get out the door with kind of the budget I have in my hand, and then demonstrate the power of the application. And so in this case, one of the very first things we did was do a recommendation engine on our website. And it was a pretty simple model, but watch consumers come in, analyze them as either financially budget oriented or whether they are specific car make model type oriented, meaning they're shopping by price or they're shopping by model, and demonstrating to them kind of a different web experience early in the buying cycle that is more oriented towards what their inherent base desires are. That's something that we were able, to knock out, put on the website, start looking at some early returns and seeing some kind of incremental improvement just by that very simple bifurcation of segmentation. And then building up on that 1,000 times since then. So that was kind of how we got started. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I love it. And I think it's the perfect transition point for us to start digging into specific areas. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Well, your team was kind enough to share a few key areas where CarMax is investing and leveraging generative AI. So I'm going to break them down as best I can, but do let me know at the end if we missed anything. The first being market insights, because honestly, I think that's really core to helping people make the best decisions. And you mentioned earlier that transparency is a really big part of what CarMax is aiming to provide its customers. So can you share a little bit more about, how these insights are presented to consumers, how they're able to make the best decisions through CarMax now? Anything you could share about, I guess, just that general customer experience side?
Sure. We have a couple of use cases here. So, I'll start with one and we can explore deeper if you want. But I think one that illuminates it pretty well is that in retail, we all know that consumer reviews carry a lot of weight with shoppers, and specifically consumer reviews that come from shoppers like me as a consumer. And so we sell a lot of cars, and we sell literally hundreds and hundreds or thousands and thousands of certain makes and models. And so we look for a way to help a consumer get through those reviews and get to the key points that are most meaningful to them. And we were able to use generative AI in this case to sift through all the reviews for, let's say, a Toyota Camry and come up with the top 5 pros and the top 5 cons, and be able to do that in a way where that we don't require the shopper to literally scroll through pages and pages of reviews that are in sequential order, but be able to summarize all this via topic. And that has proven to be very helpful, not only for the consumers, but just as an aside for our performance on search engines like Google. So that was one of the early use cases and has been, extremely effective.
No, it's great. And, obviously data is the heart of all of these experiences, right? So I'm curious, like how you gather feedback from the consumer as like they're interacting with this. I mean, either just behavioral data or explicit like verbal data, like through surveys or other forms of feedback to determine like how to best refine or add to these types of experiences, because ratings and reviews and all of those ways to distill information are so valuable. But I'm sure like over time, there's room for improvement, right? So is there anything that has been done or you plan to work on in that area?
Yes, we continue to collect data and insights for all aspects of our business, and some of these reviews and research and things like that are no exception. I think there's a couple things here. So probably like most of your listeners, if we can grab behavioral data, like data on what's actually happening at the time, that is vastly superior to any kind of survey data or anything like that. So that's what we try to do, number one, and we're pretty good at collecting that. We monitor, nearly every activity that we can from the consumer throughout what is pretty long shopping journey, frankly. I mean, very few people buy a car on a whim, and most of us take literally weeks to complete it. So we're collecting data all along the way on where are they clicking and what are they reading and how long are they staying on a page and what, et cetera, et cetera. So that's number one. Number two, we have a great product organization that is working on various aspects of that consumer journey. And that organization does a lot of discovery work, and they use all kinds of cool tools. But one of the ones that they do is they bring their MVPs, which are their minimally viable products, and place them in front of consumers and really watch the consumer go through those products and letting the consumer talk them through what are they thinking while they're clicking through these products. We found that to be an inordinately valuable insight, kind of watching a product in the wild with a consumer willing to share their thought process. That's been wonderful. And then I think the third line is kind of the traditional survey type, whether that's a conjoint or any other kind of tool that we would use to just kind of get a sense of what consumers' real preferences are or are not.
That's great. It's fascinating. There's also a immersive virtual showroom type experience that you guys have now, right? Which I could imagine is very intricate to do online, especially for something as considered as a car. I would love for you to share a little bit about what that experience is, what it's like. I mean, I know it's kind of hard since it's an audio podcast, but do your best.
Imagine, if you will.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
Setting the stage.
Yeah. Well, let me say this is the current value proposition for CarMax is to create an exceptional car buying experience. And one of the things that we know is that consumers really appreciate an omni experience. And by that, I mean, I know everybody talks about an omni experience, but because this is an extended purchasing journey, there are many, many things that the consumer would prefer to do online in the comfort of their home or office than they would in the middle of a car dealership. Even a car dealership as nice and as cool as CarMax, they still feel pressure and they feel conspicuous and stuff like that. And we don't want them to feel any of those feelings. So we think about the different things that we can bring to them online. And so we have digital merchandising and digital financing and you can do 100% of the transaction from the comfort of your couch. But one of the harder things is to help a consumer visualize being in that car and seeing those cars like they would in the store. So what we're trying to do there on the virtual showroom is kind of leverage visual technology. AI is enabling our consumers to explore a virtual showroom from their homes. We try to make it as immersive as possible to let them interact with different models, because that's kind of another value proposition of ours is, you don't have to go to 10 different websites to look at 10 different models. We have them all. I mean, we literally have 50,000 cars for sale. And so we let them see not only the exterior, which is pretty common now, but we let you get inside and we let you take a 360 view. So you can pivot your cursor any way you want, left, right, but also up and down. You can look at the back seats. You can see what the car looks like from the back seat. You can see what the car looks like from the third row. I mean, as much as we can to place you virtually within that vehicle is what we try to do. And it's no substitute for actually sitting in it and seeing how comfortable it is and how it handles, but it's definitely a great first or second step to help you narrow down to, hey, this car isn't big enough. I really need the bigger version of this car. And it's been pretty successful so far.
That's super cool. And I'm sure the level of interaction and engagement with that type of experience, that's a lot of data, right? Because you can kind of gauge how in the weeds people get into the experience, which I'm sure is helpful for your team.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see that, one, they like the view from behind the steering wheel first. But then surprisingly, many of them go right to the back seat. They could care less what the view from the passenger seat looks like. And then, 3, we call out any blemishes or scratches or anything. I mean, they're used cars, so they're not pristine. They're quite good, but they're not pristine. And so we call those out. Those are highly clicked on. And so we know that, wow, us being able to make that transparent, that's on brand for us, is also something that the consumer really appreciates. And so we're able to look at a click level as well as a time on site level to figure out, once again, the behavioral data of what actually is mattering, not just what people are saying that matters.
I love that. And what role does personalization play in this entire journey? Because, I mean, you already shared just 2 very robust ways that you're collecting data, using data. How does this show up in the customer experience? How is personalization? How are recommendations shared? Curious, how all of this, I guess, comes together in different touch points within the online experience.
Yeah, I think personalization is something that is very important to our brand, but it's also a finish line that you're never quite going to get all the way to because, look, early on, we personalized based on how much you can afford or not afford. And, that's pretty rudimentary, but then you keep going from there. And okay, now I know you like SUVs and not sedans. And then you keep going from there. Oh, you clearly like 4-wheel drive and not 2-wheel drive. And then you go from there and you keep getting more and more and more personal. And I think what we're really trying to do is to leverage technology like AI specifically to generate these personalized recommendations based on all the activities that we have captured on you to date. So sometimes that's very few. Sometimes it's just what website did you come from? Other times it's quite extensive. Like you've clicked 40 times on our website. We have a pretty good idea of what you're looking at. And what we try to do is just make sure that the experience is tailored for the journey that you are on to make it not only super efficient, but also enjoyable. And by that, I mean, sometimes we surprise and delight you a bit. That you may, let's say you've just been clicking on Toyota Camry, and they're all $30,000 and you just hit it over and over and over again. A rudimentary, one of our first gen versions of our personalization engine would just show you a bunch of other Toyota Camrys right around $30,000, just in a bunch of different colors. And what we found is when we open the aperture, and either on style, so instead of Camrys, we'll show you the Nissan version or the Volkswagen version or whatever, but also on types maybe around the price point. And we'll show you an SUV that is kind of priced the same, and maybe you didn't know you could get that much more room, as an example. And then widening it even further to the fact that, you know what, here's something that looks very, very similar, but is $7,000 less, and that's going to be $150 a month less car payment for your pre-approved process. Sometimes those things get the highest clicks of, wow, it's not even what they were searching for because they just didn't know what was possible. And so using AI to power those kind of recommendations has been able to replicate some of the great things that our long-term sales consultants are able to do in a store environment and bring that to an online environment.
I love that. So being able to open up new discovery pathways or to guide them through the experience rather than just pushing what they quote unquote told you they wanted. I love that. And I guess the final piece of this is chatbots, which, I feel like everybody is kind of talking about as they go through the benefits of AI or generative AI. I would love to hear a little bit more about how you're using these. I guess not just a reactive type source, but more so like as digital experts, so to speak, to support customers. Let's start with the customers first, and then I'll have a follow-up question for you about, I guess, the team side, the team-based benefits of them. So let's start with the customers.
Sure. Yeah, we rolled out our chatbot and made it available 24/7 to assist our consumers, mainly through queries that they have and, kind of guide them through their process, wherever they are on the journey, and just kind of using it to keep friction to a minimum, right? Once again, I've said it multiple times. This is a considered purchase. It takes a long time. There's a lot of stress because for many of our customers, this will be the most expensive thing they've ever purchased. And they have a lot of questions. And sometimes those questions are super simple, like what are your store hours, to extremely complex, like what car can I afford? And we have everything in between. And they ask questions about features of certain make, model, year combinations. And, there's 3,000 plus make, model, year combinations that we sell. And so these chatbots, Sky is our chatbot, can answer questions that all of our reps would probably have to look up and can do it instantaneous. So it keeps friction to a minimum. It answers a huge percentage of the questions that consumers have. And frankly, many of our consumers would much rather just text a chatbot than actually pick up a phone and feel like they're bothering somebody or feel like their question's dumb and they don't want to ask it. And so it's been a great model for us.
I love that. So I guess my follow-up question now is, how has incorporating the chatbot into the experience, how has it supported your people, your team from an efficiency standpoint? Because one of the things that we've heard a few times is we have this amazing chatbot to answer those questions and to be there when the customer needs it, but that allows the service team to focus on more robust questions or to service the customer in a different way. Like, does that reflect, I guess, the service that CarMax is aiming to provide? Like, what does that mean for the people side of the operation?
Yeah, so a couple things. So yes, absolutely, Sky is able to suppress a bunch of calls that we would have to put people power against, put associate resources against. And that's been great because there's not a lot of job satisfaction in looking up the store hours for our store in Richmond, Virginia. But there's a lot of satisfaction to helping a consumer progress to, a significant purchase and usually an extraordinarily happy day of their life. So that's been one. More deeply, though, we kind of took the same kind of Gen AI-based technology, applied it to our knowledge management systems. And that is, we have thousands of pages of, vehicle specs and financing information and operational information. And we were able to use Gen AI to put together a knowledge management system, which has a associate interface. We call the associate interface RHODES, RHODES. And we let the associates be able to leverage RHODES to answer the questions that consumer has. And that's been really effective because in a lot of cases, an associate would have to wait for a manager or supervisor to come by and make sure that they've researched the right answer and are providing something accurate back to the consumer. That can take 2 minutes or 10 minutes. And RHODES allows our associates to be able to get a response immediately back to the consumer for, let's say 80% of the time if the answer is XYZ. And then the other time they'll have to do the research that they would have done anyway. And that's something that we've seen the users really appreciate. And it makes them feel like they're using their time really effectively. They're helping the consumer, which is a big driver of their job satisfaction. And, frankly, it's making us a much more efficient customer interaction.
Oh, that's great. Well, Jim, we've touched on so many different areas of the CarMax customer experience and how Gen AI is leveling up that experience based on what consumers want and expect. I mean, it's such a big conversation happening in retail now across categories and even businesses of all sizes. It's pretty profound and incredible to see the testing and learning that's taken place. We've talked a little bit about, how your team is gathering and using this data to better understand and serve customers. Is there anything else, like in terms of how you've been able to garner value from all of this insight, all of these different interaction points to benefit the broader business, like other functional areas that we haven't discussed just yet?
Oh, and I mean, it's across nearly all pieces of our business. Like I said, we collected a lot of data over the years, but AI helps us power our pricing engines on, exactly what to price a vehicle in a given market. It helps us on inventory. What kind of inventory management do we need both nationally and locally? I think one of the cool latest things is we move a lot of cars. We probably have 2 million car moves a year to get inventory in the right place, to transfer a vehicle for a customer. Being able to do all that in kind of a centralized way, leveraging AI to optimize not only the cost side of the equation, but importantly, the speed. Consumers today are, they've been conditioned by Amazon to expect everything, if not in 2 days, later today. And so being able to win the speed game on logistics has been critical. And I can't imagine doing that without some kind of leveraging of AI capability sets there. And I mean, it's pervasive throughout every way that we manage our business.
That's incredible. So with that, because you have been able to test so many different things and see so much value, do you have any key lessons or words of advice for everyone listening that maybe earlier on in their journey? I mean, like I mentioned, it's such a big conversation. People are testing and learning so many different things. But for those who are relatively early in their Gen AI journey, any big takeaways or lessons that stand out to you?
I think the big ones are you can't do any of it unless you have clean, accessible data. Like if you don't have that, and it has to be clean, not just, it's pretty clean. You're just going to have bad outcomes if you don't have that. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is you're testing your way into this. What served me well is to figure out the quick wins. Like you don't have to conquer the world on day one, just conquer your block and just go out there and show somebody, here's what you can do. Because not all leaders are conceptual thinkers. Some leaders are very tangible thinkers. And so put something tangible in their hands and say, hey, it used to be X. Now it's X times 2 or 3. And it's because of this. And can you think of where you could use this in your part of the business? And that really works. And it sounds simplistic, but sometimes a good strategy is simplistic. So those are a couple of top ones that I would just focus on.
I love them because, like you mentioned, it's simple, but it's very critical to the foundation. And in my opinion, you can't have any sort of success without that really strong foundation in place. So with that, Jim, I mean, I guess the only final question for you is what's next for CarMax? What's top of mind for you? I mean, we're thinking 2025 already, trends, predictions. What's really at the top of your list going into the new year?
Oh, I'm super excited about continuing to hone our value proposition to the consumer. We want to have the absolute best car buying experience in the industry. Some of the things we talked on today around personalization and just how you can fully bring that to fold are going to be prominent in that. And for majority of our customers, that means tying your digital activities to your store activities in a seamless manner is critical, because in our category, there's a small percentage that want to do everything online, and there's a small percentage that never go online and just go to the store. But for everybody else, they want to do both, and they don't want to do any rework. So when I'm doing something, I want to make sure that that's captured and leveraged in any channel that I interact with. And I think that is something that we're very proud of where we are already, but we're nowhere near where we're eventually going to be. And I think that's going to be exciting for not only CarMax, for the car buying consumer out there.
Love it. Well, so many exciting things coming from CarMax. Jim, thank you so much for giving us the scoop on it all, how it all works, the benefits that you've seen. It's always nice to get someone on the line that not only shares what's happening, but how it all works, and of course, how the team is rallying around it. So thank you again so much for taking the time out.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I hope this went well.
It definitely did. And I'm sure some folks listening will have a few follow-up questions or their own input to share on how they're using generative AI. Of course, all of you, we'd love to hear from you. Drop us a line on LinkedIn. That's our main social channel at Retail Touchpoints. We'll be sure to tag CarMax and, of course, Jim, so he can be in tune with the conversation too. And of course, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the episode and the series as a whole. Just drop us a line, your thoughts, feedback, comments, ratings at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, frankly, anywhere else. We're probably there too. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to the show. We're speaking with folks like Jim every week, digging into the trends and tech that are driving the next era of retail. So once you subscribe, you'll get the latest and greatest delivered right to your device. But for now, that's it from us, everyone. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time. Take care. Thanks for listening to this episode of Retail Remix. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can find us on your favorite podcast player. Until next time, keep mixing it up.